Hi, everybody. I'm going to broach the topic today of awakening. Okay. Now, actually, I did a video at the Grand Canyon last summer on the topic of awakening. And so you might be interested to go and have a look at the video. It's about half an hour long. And the interesting thing is, at that time when I was recording those videos, I was always trying very hard to find myself somewhere beautiful as a background to kind of aid the inspiration. And peculiarly, it was when I decided to talk about awakening that even though I was at the rim of the Grand Canyon, I didn't do the video there. I did the video in the forest just before it because of a certain sense, I think, of humility, a certain sense that the topic was so enormous, the background didn't need to be grand. In fact, nothing needed to be grand because the subject itself was so all-encompassing, so powerful. And so I did that video, and it was completely off the cuff. And I kind of got stuck about halfway through because I found myself in a sort of a singularity. I reached the point in the explanation where all was everything, and I didn't really know where to go from there. And so I had to kind of collect my thoughts and think about it. And then I went over to the rim of the Grand Canyon and I did a sort of a more positive, directional piece for 10 minutes or so. But anyway, I thought since I've got this medium now of podcasting where the vehicle is more useful for you've got longer. I can speak for as long as I like. I can think about it a little bit more. I'm still making it spontaneous. I'm not doing this to script, but I've got the ability to explain myself more comprehensively, let's say. And so I thought it was useful to broach this subject of awakening for a second time. Now, it's a slippery business talking about awakening. People have different interpretations of what it means or what it might mean. It's also linked now peculiarly with this word woke, which I I don't really see the linkage at all, but people do. People's experiences, when I've read about other people's experiences of what it meant to them to go through an awakening. And it turns out that people have similarities, but they also have very different experiences. And that it's not really as if I or anyone can really tell you how to go about creating your own awakening moment. It's one of those things that you only really know how to go through yourself because you know what your pain points are, you know where your aspirations lead you, and somewhere along the way at the back of your mind, there is this perception of what your veil is. What are your filters that you're seeing this through? Which means that somebody else can give you a sort of a broad understanding of how you might get there according to them, but that it has to be done through your perspective. And the other thing, of course, is that the act of awakening, I say of course, let's not assume, but for me the act of awakening is a massive act of ego dissolution. Not not fracturing, but embedding into everything else. And so the sense of ego diminishes. You know what you are, or at least when I went through this process, I knew what it was that I was. And curiously, it felt stronger than before. So in certain ways, you might say that my ego was growing, but the perspective of the ego's importance was shrinking massively in the face of awe-inspiring everything that I suddenly saw as my co-creator, as my participant, rather than as something other. And so, when I talk about awakening, there is a little part of me that doesn't like the idea of me even talking about it to other people, because there's a story running around in the back of my head which says awakening sounds a little bit superior. And I know it's not. And that's why I've decided to talk about it anyway. But there is an element of me that kind of says, well, if I'm talking about this, it's placing me on a pedestal where I know. And that's exactly the opposite of where I want to come from. But I don't know how to square that circle, so I just have to accept it and talk through it, okay? Because one of the actual crucial elements that results from an awakening is a beautiful, harmonious sense of humility, of self-deprecation, also of self-love, of self-care, but of a blending of the self into into everything, you know? I don't want to talk too much about divine energies and universal unities and singularities and so on, but you come to see yourself as a participant in the universe, and that things are almost acting through you, and you can start to question what it is to have free thought, to have your own consciousness, to have free will, to have a divine spirit which is acting through you. You know, you can go very, very far depending upon your perspective. So let's start off with what I think, in my experience, and I have to parenthesize that word experience, but in my experience, what I think awakening is. And I think it's quite important to look at that word experience, because for me, in order to experience something, you are perceiving it in the past. So you have occurrences, let's say. You have events. Events occur. But to experience them, you have to attach meaning to them. You have to notice them and view them, which means no matter how idyllic that experience may be, no matter how connected with the universe that experience may be, it's an objectification. You are separating from from that, from the experience, from the people, from the event, from the instruments, whatever it may be, and you are looking at it and you are interpreting it through the stories in your mind, and you are labeling it accordingly and attaching significance or not, and coming to conclusions. And none of that is awakening. The awakening is the layer behind that. It is the lifting of the veil on the mechanisms that are running the meaning making in your mind. It's the moment when you realize that the way you have been establishing reality in your mind is like looking at a map. It's really useful. It's fantastically useful. You'd be lost without it. But it is not the territory. You cannot see everything on a map that is around us. It is a tool, a perfectly overlapping series of rules of thumb that allow you to go about your daily drives. But the territory is so much more massive than that. And that, I think, is one of the best ways that I can describe awakening. Because you're stepping forth on a journey of understanding your meaning-making approach. The processes by which you come to your own conclusions, which means that awakening is not the end of the story. Awakening is like a second beginning. It's the moment when you almost become a baby again and look at the world through childlike eyes with a memory of what it was before, a perspective, but a choice to start looking again with new childlike eyes. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all or if that sounds utter hogwash. But when I say it, it feels right to me. Okay, so let's go with that. It's a lifting of that painted veil that before you weren't even aware existed, okay? That before your conclusions felt like you, your thoughts felt like you, your identity felt like you. Things were black or white or grey. They were choices. They were all served from the ego's perspective. You kind of thought you knew you were ruling the roost of your system and that you had choice and that your meanings, whilst other people might disagree with them, were correct to you. And the moment of awakening is permitting yourself to be incorrect, permitting yourself to be conflicted, permitting yourself to be inconsistent with how you were yesterday, which is a massive shift because because the older we grow, the more we think we know ourselves, the more we're sure of what it is to be us, the more we will defend that against other people's disapproval or disagreement. And then suddenly you kind of go full circle and realize that everything that you are coming from has been seen through layer upon layer of, well, let's call them interpretations. I hesitated. I almost wanted to say misinterpretations. Who knows? But a series of conclusions that are partially correct, let's say, upon which we base the bedrock of our sense of reality about ourselves, about the world, about our place inside it, about all things. And it turns out the whole thing is a story. I think that's a good enough introduction, right? That kind of tells us what we're talking about today. So when you go through a sense of awakening, it can start pretty loudly, pretty violently, okay? For me, I'll go through afterwards how I think you can embark upon creating an awakening. That's why I'm doing this podcast, in actual fact, because the last one I didn't offer any guidance at all on how to create it. I just offered an experience of what it was. But before I give you my kind of toolbox as to how you might bring about a sense of awakening, I'd like to explain to you my experience of how it felt. because it felt to me a little bit like riding on a roller coaster, and I was not prepared for it. I hadn't chosen the roller coaster, it just occurred, and then I was aware of it. And what happens is, well, what happened to me anyway, is that I suddenly was subject to a, um, a roller coaster of shocks, a roller coaster of awarenesses. Every night, I would either have the most extraordinary understanding that might come to me in a dream or come to me in a thought and would wake me up in a shock and make me go, ha! And I would understand something from my past. And then the following night something else would occur. Or I'd be out on the street and I'd hear something. The antenna on my head were perceiving far more richly and vividly than before. And so I was aware of opportunities. I was looking for answers in a way that I hadn't before. It's like once the wedge has opened the door, the slightest fraction, it cannot snap shut because suddenly you've seen something different. And then what do you do with that? I mean, for me anyway, there was a hunger, an absolute hunger for knowledge, to dive beneath the surface and try and understand what on earth it was that was going on. But so when you begin this process, it can be extraordinary. It can be wild. You 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 wake up every morning going, "Wow, what happened there?" Right? It's as if suddenly everything, and as you mean everything, becomes questionable. Everything that you thought you kind of let be rather than clinging on to. And because suddenly you're able to look at things with fresh eyes, with baby eyes, and question everything, it's tremendously relieving. It's releasing. It's freeing. And for me, that brought about a massive state of humility because what I understood was that everything I thought I knew, I really didn't have a clue. That maybe what I thought I knew was a pinprick of the truth that was so enormously, awesomely larger than that. Or that maybe my version of the truth was utterly and totally and completely incorrect. Or that maybe from time to time it was correct, but that it was correct haphazardly, and that sometimes I might have an inspired moment, but that the vast bulk of what I had considered to be the truth throughout all those prior years, all the energies that I'd placed into things that I was certain about, well, it wasn't correct. It was never correct, even though I was sure about it at the time. And one of the things that I came to understand from that was that the intellectualizing side of me, the side that I thought was making sense of everything, was actually the least reliable start. And that I had overweighted my emphasis towards that rational, rigorous scientific, plain thinking side of myself to the expense of listening open-mindedly, open-heartedly to my emotions. And so I'd become kind of lopsided. But when you're living through your sense of identity, when you're living through your story, well, you are within the system within which you are living. So you don't know. You just think it's normal. It's the only identity you've ever had. You kind of, well, it must be you, right? Because it's the only sense of you that there's ever been. And so and so when you come to consider that, wow, everything that I've built this on might be incorrect. that I might have to look at this another time. Which curiously you're actually doing with your intellect, okay? It's this idea of letting go of the principle of defending your existing point of view, that you don't no longer need to be right, and that you're not proving this to anybody else. This is a voyage of self-discovery, and the only way to do that is to wipe the canvas clean. It's to go behind the blackboard. It's to rub away all the words. And when I say that, I can feel a sense of peace inside of myself. It's like, what am I? What am I? Am I my body? Well, no, because I can notice my body. I can sense my body. I can objectify my body. I can prick my finger and I can feel it. So that's not me because I'm observing that. So am I my thoughts? No, because I can observe my thoughts. And I can observe the observer of the thoughts, and I can observe the observer of the observer of the observer of the thought. So that's all a series of mirrors. Am I the parts of me which I'm unaware of? Am I the subconscious? Am I my automatic breathing system? Am I my lymph system? Am I the parts of me which just go on automatic pilot and from time to time throw me a bone, kind of thinking of consciousness as the monitor of a computer that just simply shows information from time to time, whereas the body is doing all the work? Is that me? But I don't think it is, because even that, I have to read the screen. I have to notice what comes up to consciousness. I know I'm not in control of my thoughts. Even as I'm speaking this to you, I don't know what I'm going to say next. Where does that come from? I don't choose my thoughts. Thoughts bubble up, and then we become aware of them. And then they kind of feel like us. But the process was the other way around. It's not that we chose our thoughts and then went, oh, yeah. So, so whilst I'm speaking to you, I'll give you one of the examples of what it is that awakening changes inside of you. And this is profound, and it took me quite a long time to work this one out. Whilst I am speaking to you, or whilst I'm working, or whilst I'm going out for a run, or whatever it may be, I'm cleaning. I'm aware of the filters that are going on in my story. And I'm noticing them and I'm cleaning them. So that when I'm speaking to you, I know it's not going to be perfect, but I am trying to clean my system so that I can speak a sort of an unfiltered, heartfelt truth. In full humility, okay, in full understanding that I'll never achieve that. In that behind the veil, there's probably another veil and another and another, and maybe I'll never get there until my deathbed, maybe even beyond that. Who knows? But my process is of constant cleaning of 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 my relationship to you who are listening to this or watching this, who I don't even know, to receive a pure signal. And if you're watching this on the video, you can see that my face just kind of goes, "What are you talking about, Chris?" But I want to communicate through, past, behind those veils, to get to something which is real, which is true, which is heartfelt, which is singular. Once you get to the point where you understand you're creating your own stories, then you can start to strip the stories away. And so the stories no longer seem to matter anymore. And so the end result is you can dare to go behind them. The story no longer draws you in inexorably, and instead you can permit the uncertainty, the ambiguity behind that to breathe, to take back many, many, many steps from yourself fearlessly, courageously even, and come to conclusions. And this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Even though it's also a little bit frightening, right? Because you're lifting the veil on what you think you are. And behind that, there's no flaw, right? Everything that you thought you knew, you don't know. I talked on the video when I was in the Grand Canyon about, I don't know if you've come across a story where people, the first time that they went in to a cinema, and the story, at least, I don't know if it's real, but the story at least, and there's a picture of it, is the video is of a train coming into a station platform, and the train is coming in at a sort of a 45-degree perspective towards the viewer, towards the people that are sat down in the cinema. And because this is the first time people have ever seen this in the cinema, as the train gets closer and closer, some of them are diving underneath the seats and some of them are running out the back of the cinema because it feels real to them. And what I said in the video is that once you understand that there is a projectionist, that there is a film which is crackling around at whatever it was, 25, 30, 60 frames a second, and that when that picture that is individual moves so quickly you can't see the gaps between it, it becomes a continuous film. And you shine a light behind it, and then you enlarge the light onto a screen which is far, far away. Well, once you've seen all that, you cannot unsee it. So then the next time you go to the cinema, you can dive into a suspended sense of reality. You can play with self-hypnosis effectively, but you never let go of the fact that there is a projectionist behind and that this is make-believe. It's the same thing with awakening. It's like you've met the projectionist. The question then is there a projectionist behind the projectionist? Okay. I can't answer any of that. Okay, that's a metaphysical, metaphorical, psychological, philosophical question. But I have seen the projectionist. And once you've done that, you can't go back, because everything that you thought you were, it turns out, was just on the screen. So one of the results of awakening, as I say, is this process of ever cleaning yourself. Another is a blurring of the distinction, of the separation of you and it, you and other. I don't know if any of you have read, there is a fantastic book, and I'm sure you can criticize it till the cows come home, but I found it warm, called The Celestine Prophecy. And it talks about, and it's just a novel, right? But it talks about, there's a moment in there where people are sat down observing the energy of nature. And you can kind of do this in nature, right? If you allow yourself to relax your vision. If you stare at a countryside, look at a tree, relax your vision, and allow yourself to see what you see, almost as if you are viewing the whole of the horizon with your peripheral vision. Well, around the tree, you're going to see a sort of an energy. Now, I don't know if that's energy or if that's just the blurring of your retina. I don't know, but metaphorically, it's quite an engaging way of realizing that perhaps there is more to the world than what we see, right? Apparently, even the entire meaning of how we create color, for example, is a perspective that we have as human beings based around our machinery in our organism that isn't real. It's a sense making mechanism that we have created to navigate our world. Once you start to see behind the veil and you start to appreciate that you are a part of a very large system, a very, very large system, and that, you have choices, you have a little bit of control, but that this vast, vast system is running on its own rules, its own operating system. And you're a minuscule, beyond minuscule speck in the vast expanse of things. But that the entire system somehow or other is in a balance, and that everything within that creates that balance. And so somehow you're responsible not only for you and for the stories that have been created through your misaligned perspective, but that also the things that you do are affecting everything around you, and things which are so far beyond you, you couldn't ever possibly consider them because there's so many of them, and the interrelatedness of everything. And for me, what came of that was a massive sense of humanity alongside humility, because suddenly I'm seeing everybody else and saying, well, but for the grace of God, go I, right? Every one of you, I could have been. My sense of reality is no better or worse than yours. They're both equally valid or both equally invalid. All of us could have been any of us, so to speak. And that brings with it an extraordinary sense of gratitude, an extraordinary sense of amazement, of curiosity, of interlinkedness with your fellow man, which brings a sense of kindness, a sense of empathy and sympathy, of unity, of knowledge, of understanding, of wisdom. And so you kind of start to see yourself as an expression of the universe rather than as an individual. There's less objectifying and more relating. whether you want to call yourself a participant, an observer, a co-creator, but you're permitting all to be. You're kind of making your way in that system to the best of your ability, but humbly accepting that you've got very little power within the vast expense of everything. So you're not dissolving into the everything. You don't lose your sense of identity. You if anything, you kind of grow your sense of identity. It becomes massive in a way because one of the benefits of that, although the door through it might have been a little bit uncomfortable because you don't know what's the other side, when you come out of it, or when you make it through, let's say, the conclusion is, I'm at home. I feel safe. I am smaller than I thought I was, and yet I'm larger than I thought I was. It's kind of strange. You're both more solid and less solid simultaneously. It's like yin and yang, and there's always more yin inside the yang, and there's always more yang inside the yin. And no matter how deeply you drill down, you're always going to see light needs dark and dark needs light. In order to objectify, there has to be a relating. In order to relating, you have to know what it is to objectify. That everything has a counteracting symbolism which is equally valid. That suddenly your concept of what's good and bad and right and wrong all flow into a soup. Ambiguity is acceptable. There's less need to push. You're part of it. There's less need to struggle. And it kind of feels like coming home. And that's incredibly comforting. And for me, that led to a sense of faith, which was so far away with what I was expecting. And I'm not going to go into to faith in this. Um, it's just one of those kind of things which I discovered. I'm not talking about faith in the same way as religion. I don't really identify with religion per se. But what I'm talking is I have a faith now in that universality, which I am so massively appreciative of, that before I differentiated myself from. So by seeing yourself as part of this large system, by questioning what it is that you are thinking, by questioning the conclusions that you are coming to, by noticing the psychological illusions by which you are running your rails, by questioning the fears, the anxieties, and whether or not they're actually credible, if they're actually occurring or simply part of you as an organism which is trying to protect itself, the whole thing softens its serrated edges. And you breathe easily. So the experience of all that, which for me it took a while, it took a year or two, but it's just kind of the first stage of awakening, in actual fact. You start to feel like a sense of extraordinary bliss. It's amazing. Even your problems feel like gifts. Everything is a gift. Everything feels to be thankful for. It feels larger than life. And that somehow everything is together. I am you, and you are me, and the world, and the air, and all things somehow, in a way that I can't understand, are in harmony. And when you notice that, you can start walking down the street with this, with the most beautiful, beautiful expression on your face, which is ridiculous, but true. I don't know if you've come across this phrase before: life breathes us, and we come along for the ride. Life breathes you, and you come along for the ride. That's an incredibly comforting thing to say. Everything becomes beautiful at that point. Life is a gift, and all is one. You find yourself at this point of singularity, let's say. Okay, so I think that's enough on the experience of awakening. It's a sort of a bouncy roller coaster ride of understanding. I talk a lot about the Stoics, okay? The Stoics approach, if you want to generalize it, because each Stoic was individual, but the generalized kind of consensus is questioning, right? It's questioning your sense of reality. It's lifting the veil, coming to see that your conclusions were based upon your experiences, which, were what they were, and coming to see that as a possible truth rather than a definitive truth. And that's a fantastic way of starting this process of awakening. Okay, so let's start to talk about how you might want to consider beginning the process of awakening. And this is just, my thoughts on the matter. Number one, comfortable delusions. I love this phrase, comfortable delusions. It's safer, more comfortable, more predictable to lie to yourself than to stare reality in the face. This, for me, is one of the definitions of self-hypnosis. Okay? So we know the truth, but we put the truth to one side because it's uncomfortable, and instead we go with a more comfortable delusion. Because it's a useful rule of thumb, it's a useful mechanism for getting through the day. Then from time to time, the comfortable delusion is exposed, and you complain, and you feel like a victim, and you blame the system, you blame others, and then you find a self-soothing mechanism to make everything feel okay again, and you rinse and repeat. This is part of the pre-awakening process. So the first step in awakening is taking responsibility for your perception, taking responsibility for what you think you are. The word responsibility, curiously, which I was not aware of, it comes from your ability to respond. You have a response ability. So rather than reacting to stimulus, okay, trigger, response sort of approach, rather than reacting on autopilot to a stimulus and then wondering what on earth is going on when you become aware consciously of what has occurred, like your fight, fright, freeze response. By taking responsibility, you are choosing your response rather than reacting on autopilot, which means putting a gap between stimulus and response. by which you give yourself just sufficient time to observe and choose rather than just going down the same rabbit warren that you normally go down. When you do that, you get out of victimhood. You stop blaming others. You disidentify with the entire concept of blaming others, and you look at life, you look at these stimuli as opportunities, as things that you can make a choice about. It's another way of starting to identify with the fact that there is a story running around inside of your head, which gives you stuff to complain about, which gives you momentum to carry on going down the route that you're currently going. Because the way to get to awakening is to come to a conclusion somehow along the way that there's got to be another way. There has to be a different way. There has to be a better way. Become aware of how you are shaped by all that is around of you. Okay? If you want, maybe you want to call that culture. Let's call it culture. So, what you think of as your perspective, what you think of as your ideas, it's possible, but it's kind of unlikely that they are really your ideas. We are a social animal. We react and relate in peer groups. Our thoughts tend to be group thoughts. The way that we react tends to be in relation to somebody else's expected response. So all of that is going on unconsciously, and it permeates us. At a cellular level, we are a social animal. And so what we think of as being our sense of reality, in actual fact, is constantly, every single millisecond of every day, we are perceiving and reacting in the back of our mind on automatic pilot from a subconscious autonomic system. And some of that comes up to perspective occasionally. We're not quite sure why some things come up to perspective and most just don't. Most we're not even aware of at all. But that all of that is flooding you every moment of every day. Even in your sleep, you're aware of these things, even though consciously you might not be thinking about them. You're aware. So therefore, if you can become aware of that, then you can start to notice how little power you have within the system. Okay, that you are constantly being bombarded with stuff, most of which goes in without you even becoming aware of it, and so you are a product of society. Let's say you're a product of your surroundings, but the stoical gift is that you also are far more powerful than you realize. And that although you don't have choice in regards to what is bombarding you, you have choice in your response. You have choice in your perception, in your understanding, and in the meaning that you attach to what you notice. So you have choice over your values. You have choice over your principles. You have choice over your rules, your policies, and procedures. You have choice over the things which you attach meaning to, and so you actually have choice over how you feel. Because you have choice over what you attach importance to. So although all that stuff is going on around you, within you is the keys not only to self-understanding and self-awareness and awakening, but to all of your feelings. And I don't know about you, but I think generally most people, most of the time, are either chasing a feeling or running away from a feeling. It seems to be part of the human predicament that we're constantly seeking out a feeling or running away from a feeling that we want less of. If any of that I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes or so gives you a shiver, makes you go, ooh, pay attention. Basically start with you, right? Question your thoughts, question your feelings. All emotions are messengers. There's no good emotion or bad emotion. They're just messengers. Once you've observed and heard the message, it tends to go away because it's been heard, right? Every single time that you do that, every single time that you question what you thought you knew, it's it's taking another brick out of the Jenga tower. So it's uncomfortable, but the conclusion is that you don't know what you thought you knew. And this is not just an individual perspective, okay? Even science, what we thought we knew 100 years ago, most of it we've had to abandon. Probably what we think we know today in science in 100 years' time, we will have had to done the etch a sketch, shake it up, and rewrite it. This is kind of the way that knowledge goes. There's eternal things, and then there's nuances and what we think that we know. Evidence eventually will come to shake up and change. So the point is, it's not so much what we're thinking. It's not the thought which is important. It's not the what's going on around. Although I'm not saying that's not important. Of course it is, because you have to survive. But it's not the thought itself is completely neutral. It's the significance that you attach to the thought. It's the way that you identify with the thought that gives it its power. Okay? So the way that you identify with it will cause you to run away from it, run towards it, seek it out, or flee. It will teach you what it is to be fearful. When you can appreciate all of your emotions as messengers, it's far easier to face your fears because you can listen to them as messengers. And believe me, behind all of your fears, there's gold. Okay, the the reason you care about a fear is because directly behind it is something that you really want. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe you can even bring yourself a sort of a metaphor of a cave filled with jewels, and at the entrance to the cave is your fear. Sometimes there's no way around that. You have to go through, because you can't prepare yourself for something which is fearful other than by trying. You know? To go back to another approach that I love of the Stoics. So I said before about how it's important to um, want to prove yourself right, and when you go through this, to maintain your sense of consistency with yesterday, to go for what it is that you think you want. And once you become aware, one of the benefits of that is this idea of letting go of what it is that you think you want, because it's a veil, right? It's a filter. It's a story. The Stoics talk about something called preferred indifference. So it's not that they don't know what their wants and needs are. There are certain things that they would prefer, but they are prepared to let go of the need for that. And the more that we kind of let go of what it was that we want, the more we have access to the things that we truly want. When you need something, when you grasp it very tightly, it's coming from a place of fear, which is itself another story. And so if you can examine what you think you need and why you think you need it, and what the catastrophe is in not achieving that, and stare that in the face and see where that came from. And is it familiar? Was there a time in the past when dot dot dot? Understand the meaning which is around the need and question it. Then you can start to see this approach of preferred indifference. Okay, so yeah, I might prefer XYZ, but I can live without it. You can get to the whole idea of happiness with this. Okay, the point is, it's confusing, and confusion is an indicator that it's working, right? Confusion is necessary in order to find clarity. It must be like this. There has to be a noisy period where you question and you don't know the answers, but you start. Basically, it's more important to find the answer than it is to remain consistent with yesterday. It's all about questioning your nature of reality, of questioning your stories, of being able to see all around you, and maybe even if times are tough, being able to see the good in what's there as well as the problems. We're a risk management machine. One good word isn't as strong in our system as one bad word. Apparently, it takes about 6 praiseworthy events to knock over one criticism. That's just kind of the way that our mind works. And so you have to question all of this because your beliefs by definition are tied to your doubts. And because doubts and fears tend to have that magnetic, caustic, risk averse side to them, your beliefs tend to be shaped in that way. And so the only way is to kind of step behind and say, all right, I'm looking at the screen. I need to pay attention to the projectionist. What's going on back there? There is a point at which, as a result, you kind of surrender. There is an awe-inspiring understanding of how limitless and expansive everything else is, and how minuscule you are within that. And therefore, that sort of letting go of your need becomes a handing over of the need to control, which is in itself also a delightfully releasing mechanism. What you're saying to yourself effectively is, I'm mostly non-conscious. I'm trying my best to understand my current situation based around the few pieces of information that come up to my conscious awareness. But that most of this is going on unconsciously, non-consciously, subconsciously. And I'm coming to conclusions which are based around my versions of reality, which are based upon my past experiences, which may or may not be valid, but which lead me to conclusions, which lead me to do the things that I do, thinking at the time that they make sense. And that maybe none of that is really true. Maybe a small element of it is true. Maybe I'll never know. And so, inevitably, I've made 1,001 mistakes. And I'm sorry for all the mistakes I've made. I'm sorry. And, this kind of goes back to faith. I don't know if you have an element of faith or an element of that connectivity of relating with the universe, whether there is a meaning attached to that, or whether that I'm sorry just goes out to your fellow man. For me, it kind of goes out to everything. It goes out to the universe, and sometimes the universe speaks back. So I tried my best based around the information that I had. And I'm human. And if you understand, whatever you are, please forgive me. I'm tiny. I'm a tiny, tiny speck of dust in the vast expanse of everything. And I didn't know any better. And I thought I knew what I was doing. Something like that. When I go for a run, I love going for a run because it's like a very pure form of meditation for me. Maybe we'll get onto meditation in a minute. When I go for a run, I, maybe it starts a bit tough for the first few minutes, and then your body becomes kind of this well-oiled machine, and everything kind of works on autopilot, and your breathing is okay, and your body is moving, and your mind goes clear. Or at least this is how, for me, when I go running, I can see the future. I get the most extraordinary inspirations when I go for a run. If I feel stuck, or if I don't know what I'm going to do next, or if I'm just looking for a sort of a lift, I go out for a run, and I'll have 3 or 4 sparks of, oh, you should try this, you should try this. It's fantastic because I'm getting out of my own box. I'm getting out of my own story. One of the things that I do when I go for a run, and this might sound utterly ridiculous, and I accept it might. So I preface that it might, because it sounds utterly ridiculous to me. But when I do it, it doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels fantastic. It feels enlightening. So I'll be there and I'll be running, and I've kind of lost the sense of my body. My body's just doing its thing. It's running, it's breathing, it's hopefully enjoying a bit of sunshine, a bit of beauty. I'm saying hello to people as I pass them. Just kind of present. I'm relating with everything. I'm not second guessing. I'm not thinking. I'm just being. I have reached that kind of Zen Satori moment, maybe you want to say. I start off at that point. I look up at the sky, I look up at the sun, I look at the trees, I look at the world, and I say, I love you. And I send it all my gratitude, my kindness, my thankfulness, my lack of understanding, my humility. I send it everything. And I just go with that. I just go with that feeling. I love you. And it's not directed to one thing, it's directed to all things. It's directed to you. And then sometimes I get rid of the I. Sometimes I get rid of the you. And I heartily recommend that you try this, no matter how silly it might sound. Okay? So sometimes it might become love you. And sometimes it might become I love. And the reason I'm doing that is because I am disidentifying with the objectification of the difference between me and it. So I either get rid of the I or I get rid of the you. I love or love you. And I feel that. And then I get rid of the other one. And it's just love. And the I has dissolved away. The you has dissolved away. And everything is one. And I'm running and I'm experiencing and I'm observing, but I'm not really noticing. I'm just feeling and sharing. And for me, that is a creation point. That is a point of singularity. That's a bit like Foucault's pendulum, and I have just hung the pendulum in the sky, and I have found the center of the universe, and I have jumped in. Because all is one at that moment. Now, I know that that's just a silly story, okay? But it feels amazing when I do that. And I've got that on call whenever I choose to do so, just by going for a run, just by going through what is effectively a ceremony. And I feel so small at that time. I feel so powerless, but I also feel so rich. So for me, that is a way of reinforcing that sense of awakenness whenever I choose to. Yeah. Since I mentioned it, let's go on to meditation. Okay. So why meditate, or why go for a run and clear your mind? Let's talk about what meditation is, okay? Because meditation can be one of two things, okay? You meditate on something. You think about something. But for me, meditation, when I do it, what I'm trying to do actually is to completely clear my mind and observe what comes up. So I go into meditation as a sort of a cleansing experience, as opposed to when I go into hypnosis, where I go with a specific intention in mind. In meditation, I tend to go with very little intention, just with open-minded observation, let's say. So I came across this phrase somewhere: just sit there and don't make anything. I can't remember where that came from, but for me, that is meditating. Okay, just sit there and don't make anything. Don't build anything in your mind. Just be. So you are passively de-identifying with your thoughts. You may notice your thoughts, you may identify with them, but as you do, you just kind of pat them on the head and let them go away, pass them off. So you kind of passively de-identify with them to the point where your thoughts become like a river, right? Or like a stream, and you can notice thoughts come and go. And so you can notice the transitory nature of those thoughts. And so you can kind of somehow transcend what you think you are. Okay. So for me, the whole idea of meditation is to get away from the control freak, okay, from the ego, from trying to define, because because this isn't big enough to see the big picture of everything. It's impossible. Okay, so the more that I try and define with my ego, more I try and create my reality, and the more I try and control that, actually, the less I know, the less I understand, the more I'm coming from a state of fear. In meditating, in opening up, or in going for a run, or walking in nature, or me going to the Grand Canyon and speaking into a microphone whilst I'm in some forest, I am relating with everything from a position of powerlessness, doing what feels right. You're creating your own little Zen pyramid. Can't believe I'm saying all this. This is this, this. I'm a kind of a practical person, but from this comes all of the gratitude, all of the curiosity, all of the joy of life. This is where you feel thrilled about what you don't know comes from. Everything is awe-inspiring. But as a result, you come to understand yourself. So you stop scattering your energy in a thousand different places, and you focus on what's relevant, on what's important, and what's noise. And so what starts off as a sort of as an effort to allocate time to meditation becomes a lifelong, effortless, connected joy. So although I might, kind of meditate when I go for a run, I'm kind of meditating now. Even when I'm working, I'm meditating. When I work with a client, believe me, I am meditating. When I relate to someone hypnotically, I'm hypnotizing myself. This is how that relation creates a new reality, creates a new worldview because of that sharing. Anyway, I'll start to get metaphysical if I go any further. So that would be nonsense. I prefer to remain humble. But thank you for listening. I reckon I must be on about an hour or so now. So let's leave it at that. And pay attention. Pay attention to your thoughts. Pay attention to your moments when you feel like you're in flow. Remember that you are inside the system that you have created. And so everything that feels like it's you is being observed from within. And the idea of taking a step outside of that is kind of uncomfortable. And that's okay. Okay? That the whole of this is a learning exercise. That if it goes too quick, you can slow down, you can go back. When you start to notice these moments of pure, unadulterated consciousness, they are so rich, they are so eternal, they are so energized, they are so pure. It's like you've gone back to first principles of yourself. You are that blackboard without anything on it, or that whiteboard, or you've gone behind that. You've reached the blank canvas, and no longer is your identity related to experience. It's no longer something to objectify. It's all one. It's all unity. I can't even say the word you anymore because it's all togetherness. And at that point, suddenly, even even the universe is no big deal. Even eternity is no big deal. Even the Big Bang and the endless expansion of the universe, or its expansion and contraction and bang, bang, bang. None of it is a big deal anymore because suddenly we're all playing a part in a system which is massive, you know. Life breathes us, and we come along for the ride. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Um, if that's of interest, let me know. I'd love your comments. Such a complicated subject, this. And I've tried as best I can to kind of give you pointers towards making your own step into awakening, should you choose to do so. But everybody's experience is completely unique, and I dare say, therefore, that mine is just mine. All right. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.